There was still space in the freezer, so I told Kate, my wife of 20 years, that I might stop by Kroger to pick up a few more items. She stood by the open window of our 40-foot luxury van, chatting away. This family trip felt special. It might be our last one together, as our twin daughters were about to start college at the University of Texas at Austin in just 6 weeks. Everyone was excited about the trip, but I was especially hopeful. Kate had been distant lately, and I saw this vacation as a chance to reconnect with her and strengthen our relationship. I was also looking forward to spending time with our daughters, exploring the surroundings, and making memories before they left for college. I assured Kate that the walk I had in mind wouldn't take more than 30 minutes and saw no issue with it. Without any strict schedule, we had planned to reach Amarillo from Fort Worth by mid-afternoon. I started loading luggage into the outer compartments of the van, making sure everything for the overnight stay was packed inside. Meanwhile, our 18-year-old daughters sat in the living area of the van, glued to their phones, chatting with friends. A month away from their social circles felt like an eternity to them. Teenage life was full of drama. Friendships made, broken, and mended, and staying connected through their phones seemed like a lifeline. For our adventures, we planned to use a Toyota Highlander, leaving the van at various campgrounds as a base. I hoped these trips would keep them engaged and distracted from the things they'd miss back home. Kate walked up to the window and said, "Okay, I'll make a list so we don't forget anything." She pursed her lips, made a playful kissing sound, and added, "Love you, baby," before turning away. This morning, she looked radiant in black yoga pants, a black tank top, and white tennis shoes. Her blonde hair was tied in a neat ponytail, and her lips had a natural gloss. Kate had always maintained her slim figure, and even after all these years, she carried herself with grace and beauty. She was once a volleyball player for the University of Texas, and though she gained a few pounds, she still looked stunning. Initially hesitant about the trip, Kate had grown enthusiastic over the past few weeks. It was our first family adventure since the pandemic began, and everyone was thrilled. The girls were especially excited about visiting the southwestern United States and Disneyland in California. Despite looking like their mother, they shared my logical and mathematical inclinations, leaning toward engineering as a career. Still, at heart, they were teenagers eager for fun and adventure. As I loaded the last bag, the screech of brakes startled me. A red Mustang came to an abrupt stop just behind our van, narrowly avoiding a collision. A young man, probably around 20, jumped out. He was blonde, mustached, and well-built. Fitter than me, though I had been working on shedding the extra 20 pounds I'd gained over the years. He approached me with an angry expression and shouted, "Where is she, you idiot?" I stepped back in shock. Katie, come here. "I'm taking you away from this horrible man," he yelled. Confused and alarmed, I demanded, "Who the hell are you?" The commotion brought my daughters out of the van, phones in hand, recording the scene. Kate stepped out too, her face pale and frozen in shock. The stranger reached out toward her and said, "Katie, let's go. I'm taking you away from this cruel man. You don't have to suffer anymore." My daughters clung to Kate, asking, "Mom, who is this guy? Why is he calling Dad cruel?" Kate said nothing. She stood there, her eyes darting between me and the stranger, fear and confusion on her face. "I'm Kate's fiancé," the man declared, looking at my daughters. "We've been waiting for your parents to finalize their divorce so we can get married." My heart sank. I took a deep breath to steady myself, aware that my daughters were recording everything. "Mom, what is he talking about?" one of them asked. "Kate," I said quietly, "do you know this man? Are you engaged to him?" The stranger spoke up. "We've been dating for 9 months, since the start of the school year. She told me how you manipulate and mistreat her and the kids. I'm here to save her from you." Kendall, one of my daughters, shot back, "Our dad doesn't do that. If Mom said those things, she's lying." Taylor, my other daughter, asked, "Mom, did you really say that about Dad?" Tears welled up in all 3 women's eyes. "Let me explain," Kate began, but Taylor interrupted, her voice filled with anger. Explain what? Are you having an affair with this man? Are you unfaithful to Dad? Feeling drained, I shook my head, took Kate's suitcase from the luggage compartment, and handed it to her supposed fiancé. She's all yours, I said coldly. Turning to my daughters, I told them, let's go, girls. We climbed back into the van, leaving Kate behind. We could still make it to Amarillo by late evening. After giving their mother a disapproving look, my daughters turned away and headed back to the van. As they passed her and her lover, they raised their middle fingers in unison. Kate grabbed my hand, begging me not to leave. Despair washed over her in waves, while her lover stood helplessly beside her. He had imagined himself as a hero rescuing her, but now he faced the truth. She wasn't a damsel in distress. Instead, she was a dragon in disguise. Don't leave me, she begged. I don't want to see you anymore, I replied. I'll contact Terry and start the divorce process. You need to find a lawyer and give his details to Terry. Terry Carr, my college roommate and longtime friend, wasn't a family law expert, but his extensive connections gave me confidence that I'd be in good hands. As Kate knelt down, crying, I realized that her tears no longer had the power to devastate me the way they once did. My daughters silently climbed back into the van while I started the engine and drove away. In the rear-view mirror, I saw Kate bury her face in her hands while her boyfriend awkwardly placed a hand on her shoulder, watching us leave. The drive from Fort Worth to Amarillo along State Highway 287 is one of the most monotonous routes in the United States. The endless flatlands are only interrupted by the desolate waterfall at Wichita Falls. I remembered an old Texas monthly magazine I once read at my grandparents' house. It listed the 10 worst jobs in Texas, and ninth on the list was a chicken sexer, someone responsible for identifying the gender of baby chicks. We didn't stop in Wichita Falls, but went straight to Quanah, Texas, a small town named after the legendary Comanche chief Quanah Parker. Quanah was the son of Cynthia and Parker, a white woman captured by the Comanches as a child, and her Comanche husband, Chief Peter Nakona. Quanah Parker's life is a prominent part of Native American history. We stopped for lunch in the town and visited the square, taking pictures in front of the Quanah Parker Monument at the Hardeman County Courthouse. Cynthia's story inspired the John Wayne movie The Searchers, one of our favorite classic films. My daughters and I shared a love for old movies, a trait they seemed to have inherited from me rather than Kate. In preparation for the trip, we'd held a movie marathon, watching timeless classics like The Searchers and HUD, starring Paul Newman, which was filmed in Claude, Texas. As we drove through Claude, all three of us decided to turn off our phones. I expected one of two outcomes. Either Kate would flood us with calls and messages, begging us to come back, or there would be silence as she embraced her newfound freedom with her lover. The quiet ride along the highway gave me time to reflect. The 40-foot van we were driving was a dream of mine, though it didn't actually belong to me. It was a joint purchase by my parents, Guy and Tony Conroy, and their close friends, John and Emily Franks. My mom and Emily had been best friends since 8th grade. They went to prom together twice, and even shared a dorm at North Texas State University in Denton, Texas. It was at NTSU that Tony met Guy, a shy law student. After a few weeks of dating, Guy introduced Emily to his best friend, Don Franks, another law student. Both couples married 2 years after graduating, and within 6 months of their weddings, they each had children. My parents named me Peter, after my mom's family, the Petersons. Don and Emily named their daughter Catherine, after Emily's mother. Everyone called her Kate. Kate had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. I even recall the first time I saw her undressed, when we were toddlers and our moms bathed us together. Looking back, I can't help but shake my head. Times have changed, and such moments wouldn't happen today. Kate and I were inseparable. We shared everything, from our first ice cream cone to our first roller coaster ride, from our first day at school to our first kiss. Our bond was unbreakable. We attended the University of Texas together, me studying engineering, and Kate studying literature. She earned her teaching certificate while I started working for an aerospace company in Fort Worth. Kate continued her education at NTSU, eventually earning a doctorate in literature. She started teaching at Fort Worth Community College and gave birth to our twin daughters. After gaining experience in aerospace, I decided to start my own business, using 6 patents I had developed. However, after arbitration, it was ruled that 2 patents belonged to my former employer since they were created during my tenure there. The other 4 were legally mine, and I decided to license 3 of them and use the 4th to create a manufacturing business. Kate and I seemed destined to be together forever until things began to change. 5 years ago, Kate had a miscarriage. The pregnancy had been unexpected but welcomed. After taking antibiotics for a tooth extraction, her birth control had been compromised. Despite the surprise, we were thrilled at the thought of expanding our family. But during her 3rd month of pregnancy, Kate experienced severe cramping while teaching a class on gender identity in Hemingway and Fitzgerald's literature. She excused herself and went to the restroom, where she suffered a miscarriage in a bathroom stall. She tried calling me, but I was unavailable as I was proctoring an exam. She also called her mom, who didn't answer, and finally reached out to my mom, her second mother. My mom rushed to support her. Kate chose not to call an ambulance, and when my mom arrived, she found her sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. They drove to the hospital together, where the doctor explained that there were no physical reasons for the miscarriage. Her body had simply rejected the pregnancy. We could still get to Amarillo by late evening. After giving their mother a disapproving look, my daughters turned away and headed for the door of the van. Together, they turned to their mother and her lover, raising their middle fingers in unison. Kate grabbed my hand, begging me not to leave. Despair washed over her in waves, and her lover stood helplessly by her side. Everything was not going as he had imagined. He thought himself a hero who had come to save her, but now he was faced with the reality that she was no damsel in distress. She was a dragon in disguise. "Don't leave me," she begged. I don't want to see you anymore," I replied. "I will contact Terry and start the divorce process. You need to find a lawyer and give his details to Terry. Terry Carr, my former college roommate and longtime friend, may not have majored in family law, but his extensive network of connections assured me that I was in good hands." When Kate knelt down and started crying, I realized her emotions no longer had the power to devastate me the way they once did. My daughters took their seats, and I drove the van away from the curb. In the rear-view mirror, I saw Kate burying her face in her hands while her boyfriend awkwardly put a comforting hand on her shoulder. They stood there, watching us drive away. A trip from Fort Worth, Texas, to Amarillo along State Highway 287 is one of the most uneventful journeys in the United States. Endless stretches of nothingness are broken only by the desolate waterfall of Wichita Falls. I remembered visiting my grandparents and coming across an article in an outdated Texas monthly magazine. The article rated the 10 worst professions in Texas, and 9th on the list was a chicken vent sexer, a person responsible for determining the sex of chickens. We didn't visit Wichita Falls, but headed straight to Quanah, Texas, named after the legendary Comanche chief Quanah Parker. Quanah was born to Cynthia and Parker, a white woman captured by the Comanches as a child, and her Comanche husband, Chief Peter Nakona. Quanah is a prominent figure in Native American history. We stopped for lunch in the small town and toured the town square, taking pictures of my daughters in front of the Quanah Parker Monument at the Hardeman County Courthouse. Cynthia's story inspired the creation of John Wayne's film The Searchers. My daughters and I love classic movies. It seems they inherited this trait from me rather than their mother. In preparation for the trip, we organized a marathon of timeless films, including The Searchers and HUD, starring Paul Newman, which was filmed in Claude, Texas. When we drove through Claude on our way to Amarillo, all 3 of us decided to turn off our phones. I expected one of 2 outcomes. Either we would be inundated with calls and messages from Kate begging us to return, or there would be complete silence as she embraced her newfound freedom. No controlling husband or demanding daughters would hold her back anymore. The quiet ride along the highway gave me time to think. The huge 40-foot van we were driving had been a dream of mine, though it didn't belong to me. My parents, Guy and Tony Conroy, along with their close friends John and Emily Franks, had made a joint purchase. My mom and Emily had been best friends since 8th grade. They went to prom together twice, and even shared a dorm room at North Texas State University in Denton. It was at NTSU that Tony met Guy, a shy law student. After a few weeks of dating, Guy introduced Emily to his best friend Don Frank, also a law student. Tony and Guy married 2 years after graduating from law school, and Don and Emily tied the knot around the same time. Within 6 months of their weddings, both couples had children. Tony and Guy named their son Peter after Tony's family, the Petersons. Don and Emily named their daughter Catherine after Emily's mother. Catherine, affectionately called Kate, had always been part of my life. I remember the first time I saw Kate undressed. We were very young, and our moms put us in the bathtub together. Looking back at old photos, I shake my head at how times have changed. Today, our parents would never have taken such pictures. Kate and I were inseparable, sharing all our experiences. From our first ice cream cone to our first roller coaster ride, from our first day of school to our first kiss. There was nothing we didn't do together. Our bond was unbreakable. We attended the University of Texas, where I studied engineering, and Kate studied literature. After earning her teaching certificate, Kate began teaching, and I started a job at an aerospace company in Fort Worth. Kate continued her education at NTSU, earning a doctorate in literature over 7 years. She began teaching at Fort Worth Community College and gave birth to our daughters. Having experience in the aerospace industry, I decided to start my own business, leveraging 6 patents I obtained from my former employer. Although 2 of the patents were claimed by the company after arbitration, the remaining 4 were mine to use as I saw fit. I licensed 3 and used the 4th to establish a manufacturing enterprise. Together, Kate and I seemed unstoppable, but circumstances changed. Kate suffered a miscarriage 5 years ago, an unexpected but welcome pregnancy. Despite the initial shock, we were thrilled. However, in her 3rd month of pregnancy, while teaching a class, she experienced severe cramps and miscarried in the bathroom stall. Unable to reach me or her mother, she called my mom, who rushed to support her. The miscarriage devastated Kate. Although the doctors assured us she could conceive again, she asked me to have a vasectomy, and I agreed. Our family of 4 was enough for me, but the miscarriage took a toll on Kate's mental health. She became distant and withdrawn, refusing therapy or comfort. One day, Kate showed signs of improvement, texting and posting on Facebook again. Just as I began feeling hopeful, my daughters approached me with a shocking revelation. They had seen Kate kissing another man at the mall. Confronting Kate, she initially denied any affair, but eventually admitted to an emotional entanglement with Kevin Saunders, a colleague. Though she claimed it hadn't turned physical, the betrayal was clear. I insisted Kate leave her job and demanded complete transparency going forward. She agreed, but the trust between us was shattered. Just as we began to rebuild, 18 months later, Kate was diagnosed with breast cancer during a routine checkup. The tumor was small, but her family history of the BRCA1 gene prompted a series of difficult decisions. Kate's journey has been a whirlwind of loss, betrayal, and resilience. Despite everything, she remains a part of my life, a complex figure in a story that's still unfolding. Kate's diagnosis led her to choose a lumpectomy instead of a mastectomy. She was deeply affected by the decision, as she had always taken pride in her body, especially her untouched breasts, even after nursing 2 children. The prospect of losing them plunged her into a deep depression. For months, her interactions with me and our daughters were strained. Any minor issue would provoke an exaggerated reaction. However, one day, She unexpectedly seemed to emerge from the fog of her depression, acting more like her former self, reminiscent of her recovery after her miscarriage. For months, I refrained from checking the cloned iPhone I had set up to monitor her activity. When I finally charged it and investigated, I found nothing suspicious. No questionable messages, photos, apps, or history. It seemed she had genuinely turned over a new leaf. Yet, as I later realized, I was only deceiving myself. My surveillance had inadvertently taught her how to become a better liar. I searched for a hidden phone multiple times, going through coat pockets, shoe boxes, her car, and every conceivable hiding place. I found nothing. The one place I couldn't search was her classroom, where a phone could be easily concealed. Kate was careful, avoiding using her devices where I could monitor them. Despite my vigilance and knowledge of infidelity, I was unprepared for her lover to show up in our lives in person. The drive from Quanah to Amarillo was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts about what had transpired. Our daughters were well aware of the impending divorce. They had been direct witnesses to their mother's betrayal. While their initial pleas for reconciliation after the first affair were heart-wrenching, the discovery of her long-term affair with another man was devastating. Kate's actions left me seething with anger. The worst blow came when I learned she had lied about me to her lover, painting me as a violent and abusive husband. These fabrications cut deep, as I had never been abusive in any way, despite my flaws. We had planned a family road trip for months, and despite everything, we decided to proceed with it. We left Amarillo and headed west along the famous Route 66, stopping in Tucumcari, Albuquerque, and Santa Fe before heading south to Flagstaff, Arizona. From there, we went to Las Vegas for a few days and then continued to Los Angeles. Our itinerary included Disneyland, Universal Studios, and other attractions. After a week in Los Angeles, we planned to drive up the Pacific Coast Highway to San Francisco. We wanted to explore Fisherman's Wharf and visit Napa and Sonoma Valley wineries. From there, our route would take us to Salt Lake City, Cheyenne, Nebraska, and Iowa, eventually arriving in Chicago. After exploring Chicago, we planned to head south to Nashville and Memphis, with a stop at Graceland, a place the girls were eager to visit after watching the Elvis movie. The trip was meant to be a month-long adventure to create lasting memories, but everything felt overshadowed by Kate's betrayal. While preparing for the trip, we revisited Palo Duro Canyon, a destination from our childhood vacations. We hiked to the Lighthouse, a famous rock formation, and attended a live musical performance in the outdoor amphitheater. The show, recounting the history of the Texas Panhandle through music and dance, ended with fireworks. It was these early experiences that had sparked Kate's and my love for musical theater, a passion we passed on to our daughters. On the first night of the trip, after setting up camp, I grilled hot dogs and served potato salad. I allowed the girls a glass of wine each during dinner. As we ate, the conversation turned serious. "I think this means a divorce," Taylor said, looking at me with tears in her eyes. "Why did she do this to you?" Kendall asked, "And why is she lying about you? She told that guy you were violent." Their words hung in the air, heavy with the truth we were all grappling with. Kate decided not to undergo a mastectomy, opting for a lumpectomy instead. Despite her choice, the diagnosis profoundly affected her. She had always been proud of her body, especially her firm, untouched breasts, even after nursing 2 children. The thought of surgery plunged her into a deep depression that lasted for months. During this time, she became distant and often unhappy with me and our daughters. Her reactions to even minor things were exaggerated. Then, one day, she suddenly changed, returning to the Kate we knew and loved. Her transformation reminded me of how she had been after her miscarriage, when the depression lifted and she found herself again. I hadn't touched the clone iPhone in months, but I decided to charge it, bracing for the worst. After a thorough investigation, I found nothing suspicious. No unfamiliar numbers, incriminating messages, photos, videos, or apps. Kate seemed to have turned over a new leaf, determined to start fresh. However, in hindsight, I realized I was deceiving myself. Unintentionally, I had taught her to be a more skilled liar. I searched for hidden phones relentlessly, through coat pockets, shoe boxes, even her car's nooks and crannies, but found nothing. The one place I couldn't check was her classroom, where she could easily hide a phone beyond my reach. Kate was cautious, rarely using her phone or computer, ensuring I had access to nothing incriminating. Still, I wasn't prepared for what came next, her lover appearing at our house. The drive from Quanah, Texas, to Amarillo was silent, each of us processing the events of that morning. Our daughters already knew about the impending divorce. They had witnessed their mother's infidelity firsthand. Their earlier pleas for reconciliation after Kate's first betrayal had been heartbreaking, but her long-term affair, one involving love, intimacy, and lies, was devastating. It infuriated me to know she had misled her lover about the state of our marriage. She had vilified me as a violent man and fabricated stories to justify her betrayal. Although I have my flaws, I have never been violent, physically or mentally. Her lies wounded me deeply. We initially planned to visit Palo Duro Canyon State Park, the second largest canyon in the U.S., but decided to extend our trip west along Route 66. We drove through Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Flagstaff, and even spent a few days in Las Vegas before heading to Los Angeles. In L.A., we visited Disneyland, Universal Studios, and other attractions before continuing north along the Pacific Coast Highway to San Francisco. From there, we explored Napa Valley and Fisherman's Wharf before heading east through Salt Lake City and Cheyenne. Our road trip, originally planned for 4 weeks, stretched into 5. Day trips often turned into overnight stays, giving us time to process everything that had happened. The girls were due back in Austin to check into their college dorms, so we eventually returned to Fort Worth. When we arrived home, my father was waiting on the porch. His motorcycle was parked in the driveway, but there was no sign of Kate, her parents, or my mother. As I stepped out of the van, I called out, "Dad." He smiled. "Pete, are you alone?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. The GPS in the van threw them off, and Don's computer skills are outdated. Relieved, I stretched and headed inside, but his next word stopped me. "Kate's in a psychiatric clinic," he said. I froze, processing this unexpected news. I had been exploring the neighborhood and noticed that all 3 cars were parked in Kate's driveway. The same car her lover had driven a few weeks earlier was parked on the street 2 houses down from her parents' house. 2 hours later, at the appointed time of our meeting, I drove around the block and saw his Mustang parked 2 streets away. My mother's car was parked behind him, and there were 2 people inside his car. It was infuriating. "Hi, baby," Kate said, opening her arms to hug me. "Stop it, Kate," I replied. "I don't need your hugs." I walked to the armchair in the living room. Normally, I would sit on the couch with Kate during visits, but this time, I wanted to keep my distance. Kate sighed and sat on the couch opposite me. "We need to figure this out," she pleaded. "There's too much love between us to ruin everything because of one stupid mistake." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A mistake? I scoffed. Getting engaged to another man, while staying married to me, is more than just a mistake. I shook my head in disbelief. "I'm here to discuss the next steps regarding our divorce. Terry mentioned you didn't tell him the name of your lawyer. The reason is that I don't want to get divorced," she said. "I love you. I believe we can work together to save our marriage. I love you, and I know you love me. Together, we can overcome any obstacles. What about your fiancé? Do you think he has anything to say about this?" I asked. "He's not my fiancé," she replied. "It's true I had an affair with him. I made a mistake, and I regret it. I have feelings for him, but it's not love. My heart belongs only to you. Are you still with him?" I asked. Kate avoided looking me in the eye and instead played with her wedding ring. "He came to see how I was doing." "How often?" "Once, twice daily," she admitted. her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. "You turned to him because you were upset that I left you," I said. "But I left you because you cheated on me with him." Kate screamed, "You left me. When you left, I was crying. He was the only one who comforted me. So if I drive around the neighborhood, I won't see him 2 streets away, sitting in a car with my mother?" I asked. Her eyes widened as she realized I'd uncovered her deception. I stood up and calmly told her, "Kate, it's time to find a lawyer. Give them all the information about Terry. You can marry this jerk, and I can move on. We'll cross paths at weddings and funerals. But eventually, we'll drift apart and become strangers. You'll just be the woman I married once." Kate stared at me in horror, her face pale. "No, I'll never be able to see you," she sobbed, hugging herself and rocking back and forth, repeating, "No, no, no." I looked at her sadly, shook my head, and left the house. 2 streets away, I stopped next to her lover's car and rolled down my window. Inside, my mother was glaring at me with hostility. "I just left Kate's. She's a complete mess. You should go check on her," I said, then drove away. Returning home, I realized the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Kate hired a formidable lawyer, Donna K. Rafi, famously known as D.K. Rafi. She had gained prominence for securing a $270 million divorce settlement for Dallas socialite Pauline Pickett against her oil man husband. At first, they insisted on marriage counseling, which I refused. It wasn't our marriage that collapsed, but my wife's actions that destroyed it. However, I was forced to attend 10 court-appointed sessions and chose a counselor, Dennis Lompier, who specialized in treating wounds caused by infidelity. During our first session, Dennis asked, "Mr. and Mrs. Conroy, what are your goals for this consultation?" Kate spoke first. "I made a huge mistake. I cheated on my husband and feel an immense sense of guilt. I want to avoid divorce and strengthen our marriage." I stared at her in shock. "She's still with that idiot," I said. "She's even engaged to him." Dennis reminded me to remain calm and asked, "Kate, is this true? Are you really engaged to someone else while claiming you want to save your marriage?" Kate admitted, "Brian asked me to marry him, but I refused. I want to focus on saving my marriage." I looked at Dennis. "Do you think this is a classic case of monkey branching?" I asked. "She refuses to devote herself completely to her boyfriend until she's sure our marriage is over. But she also doesn't want to leave me unless I agree to forgive her." "It's textbook monkey branching." Kate interjected. "If you promise to stay with me, I'll tell him I can't marry him. I'll return the ring." I stared at her. "The fact that we're discussing your consent to another man's proposal shows how bad our marriage is," I said. "When was the last time you had intimacy with him?" Kate hesitated. "I don't remember." "Let's be realistic, Kate," I urged. "How many times have you slept with him? When was the last time?" "This morning," she replied softly, tears streaming down her face. I stood up, thanked the therapist, and left. The divorce process was long and grueling. Kate and her lawyer attacked everything I owned, including my businesses and patents. Despite all the obstacles, I agreed to each of their demands to end the ordeal. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. By then, I had moved to Austin, bought an apartment near Lake Travis, and started a new chapter with my daughters regularly visiting. Months later, my daughters informed me that Kate's patents, the ones I had transferred to her, were now practically worthless. A new company, PTK Incorporated, held patents that rendered the old ones obsolete. My daughters smiled knowingly as I raised a glass to their cleverness. Kate remarried soon after, but my daughters refused to attend the wedding, expressing their disapproval. On the night of her wedding, I sat on my terrace, sipping bourbon and plucking the strings of my guitar, feeling melancholy but also free from the chaos of the past. It had been over a year since I last picked up a guitar, and playing the familiar intro to Guy Clark's song L.A. Freeway felt impossible. What once came naturally to me now felt foreign. I stumbled on the chords, struggling to regain my rhythm. Suddenly, my phone buzzed and rang, breaking my concentration. Both my daughters and my father were calling me at the same time. Ignoring my father's call, I answered Taylor's. "Daddy, did you hear that?" Taylor asked, her voice tinged with urgency. "What is it?" I replied sharply, skipping pleasantries. "Wait, Kendall left you a voicemail," Taylor explained. "Grandpa's calling too." Before I could process it, she added, "I'm putting you on speaker." "Mom tried to harm herself tonight," Kendall's trembling voice said. I could hear her crying, while Taylor tried to stay calm. It was shocking. Kate, my ex-wife, had taken a bottle of sleeping pills and was found lying in the bathroom during the wedding celebration. She had left the festivities, retreated to her room, and attempted something reckless. Luckily, the house cleaner discovered her in time, preventing a tragedy. I couldn't help but feel that Kate's behavior was spiraling out of control, wreaking havoc on her life. It was a heartbreaking and unfortunate situation. Her family, to their credit, rallied to support her. While I sympathized with her and her new husband, I reminded myself that these were no longer my problems. "Are you going there tonight or tomorrow morning?" my daughters asked hesitantly. Their question caught me off guard. "I'm not going at all," I said firmly. "I don't hold a grudge against your mother, but she removed me from the role of her husband. If you want to go, I'll pay for your plane tickets and escort you to the airport. I'm sure one of your grandparents can meet you there." Their displeasure was evident, but the next morning, the four of us, my daughters, my father, and I, were on I-35, heading north to Dallas. To my surprise, my father decided to join us, citing that he couldn't miss the drama. After dropping him off at the Hilton Hotel to check in, I took the girls to the hospital. The receptionist led us to the waiting area. A lone man sat gloomily, staring at the floor. Kate's mother spotted me and immediately turned on me with anger. "This is unconscionable," she exclaimed. Taylor stepped in defiant. "You need to shut up, Grandma. Step back." Kendall added sharply, "It's all because of Mom. She lied and cheated on Dad, got engaged to the man she cheated with, married him, and now tried to harm herself. So please, explain to us how Dad is to blame for all this." Kate collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her mother joined her, and they clung to each other, crying. Kate's father approached me gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's not your fault, Pete. Either she's to blame or we are. We should have taken action against that idiot when he first appeared, but instead, we let him stay." As we talked, the man in question stood up and glared at us. "What will happen to her now?" I asked Kate's father. "She'll come home with us," he said. "She needs therapy and care. Once she recovers, she can decide what to do with her marriage." The man disagreed, but Kate's father stood firm. Eventually, the man stormed out of the hospital. Later, my daughters visited their mother briefly. When they returned, Kendall hugged me, crying softly. "Mom wants to see you, Dad," she said. Kate's parents looked at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Pete," her father said. "It would mean so much to her." "I can't," I said, shaking my head sadly. "I'm not a family member or a friend anymore. I'm just the man she was once married to." My words hung in the air, and we all broke into tears. 4 days later, we were back in Austin. Before leaving Fort Worth, I learned from Kate's father about everything that had happened since I moved away. Kate and her new husband's plans had fallen apart. The patents I gave them were worthless. The company was sold to employees, and they had no legal rights to anything. The man had quit his teaching job to take over the company, only to find out it was gone. He returned to teaching, and their financial struggles began. Kate blamed herself for their downfall and felt deeply ashamed of her actions. She had destroyed her marriage, hurt me, and caused her family immense pain. She admitted she never wanted to marry the man, but felt obligated after everything she had done. 15 months later, Kate appeared on my doorstep with a suitcase in hand. "I need to fix everything," she said. I've been a terrible wife and mother. I'm here to try to make things right." Before I could respond, Elizabeth, my new wife, walked into the hallway. Dressed in yoga pants and a t-shirt, her stomach slightly swollen, she asked, "Darling, who's at the door?" "It's the woman I was once married to," I said, carefully closing the door. That was the last I saw of Kate. I later heard she was in a psychiatric clinic under close supervision. Life moved on. I focused on my growing family and career, leaving the past behind. Some chapters are best left closed.